Teaching better, teaching well, teaching effectively isn't doing more with more. It's doing what matters most.
All right, so let's get to episode 2, and we're really focusing on self-care, community care, and classroom care, and what that all looks like. So to get started, we got to introduce Alexis. So Alexis, you are a former South Carolina teacher. You were impacted by burnout. It seems like a couple of times, not to steal any thunder from your story. But because of that, you've become an advocate for people who are suffering from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here with you all today and to just get into this discussion. I'm hopeful that I'm presenting something that's new and also valuable to you as we talk about the importance of self-care and teacher well-being, especially in the midst of what really is this national teacher crisis, and talking about how we can make the teaching profession more sustainable so that folks can show up with joy and also feel fulfilled both in and out of the classroom. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the misconceptions of the good teacher, and that is in quotes for a great reason. There are a lot of conceptions and misconceptions we have around what it takes to show up well. And so today what we're going to explore is the impact of those perceptions and misconceptions on the profession, and talking about self-care, sustainability, and wellness. So one of the things that I talk a lot about in my work is called the good teacher narrative. And the good teacher narrative essentially is this internalization of aspirational ideals. So it's not inherent, but what happens is there are all of these external factors and all of these different components that help us to create what eventually becomes this internalized narrative. And so, for example, some of the things that we see and that we hear, especially when you think about early on in your teaching career, as well as teacher prep programs, including my own teacher prep program, which I loved, but that also perpetuated some of these ideals. So we hear things like, teachers are like candles. They consume themselves to light the way for others. Or we hear that teachers are better than 1,000 days of diligent study. I believe that's a proverb. And then also just this constant idea that good teachers are the very heart of the educational system. And I think we would all agree that teachers very much are the grassroots of what we do in K-12. But the thing about all of these narratives is they put the onus of the entire system on individual educators. So let's talk a little bit about teacher types. And so when we talk about those norms and the way that we internalize those, what we do is we take those different expectations and we make them about us. And then what happens is that we make choices to perpetuate those teacher types. And so just like those teacher ideals, those teacher types really are rooted in socialization, especially for women, right? Still, a lot of women are socialized to, again, think in terms of being a mother, being a nurturer, being a caretaker. Media influences, those personal influences. And then, of course, there are cultural expectations as well. So as a Black female, for example, there are certain expectations on me culturally as far as how I will show up in professional spaces and what that work ethic will look like. And then, of course, there are district and school expectations that all feed into what I kind of have classified as 4 different teacher types. So there's the hardworking teacher, the caring teacher, the devoted teacher, and the dynamic teacher. And the thing about these teacher types is each teacher type has sort of this identified mantra. It's this way that you operate in order to fulfill or sustain that particular teacher type. So just kind of giving some quick examples. So for the hardworking teacher, which would be the first teacher you see on the screen, that core narrative would be, if I take work home on weekends or at night, then I'll get more done and my students will experience more growth. In general, the hardworking teacher believes that more work equals more results. And the choices that stem from that core narrative then are potentially fueling that burnout and that overwhelm. Then we have the caring teacher, which is that teacher that believes I'll do whatever it takes for the kids. Now, I'll do whatever it takes for the kids is often to the detriment of themselves. These are typically those teachers that are going to show up to work sick, that are not going to take those mental health days, that are going to prioritize their students and their jobs and their classrooms over their own personal health, over their relationships with their families, et cetera. Then you have the devoted teacher. That devoted teacher is arriving early, staying late, is involved in as many committees as is possible, and then also attends extracurricular activities in order to support students. That devoted teacher is all in all the time. And then finally, there is the dynamic teacher type, which is that teacher that believes that every lesson needs to be original, dynamic, and Instagram worthy. And the thing about the teacher types is that typically you can see a little bit of yourself in each of them. And I do want to emphasize that these types are not inherently bad or inherently negative. The thing about these teacher types, though, is that we internalize them in such a way that we make choices that are ultimately harmful over the cumulative long term. Okay. So the thing about teacher types and the good teacher ideal is that we often believe that teaching better, that teaching well, that teaching effectively is doing more with more. More work equals more results. More time equals more dedication. More attendance at extracurricular activities means that I care more. We add all of these pieces to what we do because we believe that the more that I do, the more effectively or the better I'm showing up. And ultimately, it is those choices that we're making to perpetuate those ideals that are continuing to perpetuate those narratives that continue to perpetuate those choices. So it's really this cycle that ultimately keeps us stuck. And it is what I posit contributes to fueling our burnout and keeping us in these unhealthy cycles and systems that continue to make burnout a problem. And so I think ultimately what we have to start thinking about in order to optimize our teacher types, in order to move towards that more healthy end of, our hardworking teacher selves or our dedicated or caring or dynamic teacher selves, is to consider how it is that our choices reflect our core values. Core values meaning what matters most to me, not just about teaching and learning, but in life in general. When I look at my friendships, when I look at my career path, when I think about my students in teaching and learning, what is it that is most important for me to derive from these experiences? And so good teachers don't always teach better, especially if your conception of a good teacher and the choices that you're making based on that conception are rooted in some of those problematic historical contexts and some of the social influences and some of the media influences, et cetera. So the question then becomes, how can I be a good teacher that is able to teach well, that is able to show up effectively? And I have some ideas. Number one is what some of you have already done here, and that's to evaluate and identify your good teacher narrative. The first thing you have to be aware of is, what is the narrative that you're telling yourself? Once you identify your good teacher or your teacher type, then you're able to kind of be mindful about what choices might you be making? What beliefs is it that you're operating out of that relate back to that teacher type? Step two is to get back to basics. I talked a little bit earlier about identifying your core values and determining your impact. So all that means is determine what matters most to you, and then decide how it is that you want that to show up. How do you want those core values to end up being your ripple effect or your legacy, if you will, both in your classroom and out of your classroom as well? And then step three is prioritizing self-care. You see self there as an acronym. And that's because when I think of self, I think of social emotional learning first. And I'm thinking about social emotional learning for self as well as for others. It's also important that we're prioritizing community care. Self-care doesn't happen unless our entire community is also invested in us prioritizing ourselves. So that includes from top down as well as bottom up. It means we have to have those self-care prioritizations at the administrative level as well as the classroom level. So I actually have some resources that will help you hopefully get started to taking action. The first thing is this impact statement template, and these are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, I have them linked on my website, but you can also just look up the AfroEducator on Teachers Pay Teachers, and these resources are here for you. But this impact statement template is almost like a mission statement, except it's primarily focused on helping you identify your core values and then taking action or deciding what actions that you can take in order to prioritize those core values and make decisions based on what matters most to you. I also have my guide to classroom cultures of wellness. And so this resource is going to help you establish routines that promote a wellness culture within your classroom. And this is for, really classrooms in grades K through 12. This is really designed to be able to be used with all levels of students. I used it with both elementary, upper elementary, as well as middle school students as well. This is going to help enhance your student relationships when you talk about vulnerability, transparency, when you talk about compassion and empathy. This guide to creating classroom wellness routines is all about being able to establish those practices right there within your classroom, and are also going to be a natural way to be able to really support social emotional well-being. So the last thing that I would like to leave you all with this afternoon is that teaching better, teaching well, teaching effectively isn't doing more with more. It's doing what matters most.
I love that, Alexis. Thank you so much. And now this is the time when we get to ask you questions. My first one was, and I'm going from like the beginning to the end here. You had said, a lot of teachers, especially because I was the same way as you when I came in, I was like all hopped up on the energy of like freedom writers and waiting for Superman and all of that. My question is, okay, if you're not going to come in with that much passion, what do you come in with? Like, what should be the mindset that a new teacher arrives with that's healthy, but also, that still gives them that spark to be a good teacher in the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I think teachers have to enter the classroom with a very clear and specific idea about why it is that they're there. And I think so many times it is just relegated to this, well, I just want to help people, right? But I think we have to help new teachers drill down into what that specifically means. Well, I want to help people learn. Okay. So then you have to drill down into how do you want to do that?
My second question is, as a leader, how do I guess it's two parts. How do I recognize that this is happening, right? So I could see, I could take your quiz, I could identify it for myself. How do I recognize that it's happening? A. B, and I mean this in the best way possible, how do I then care? Because obviously those good teachers, like you said, they hold up the school environment. They're the ones making the bulletin boards. They're the ones running the committees. How do I then balance, my need to get stuff done with my need to take care of the people that are in my care?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have a couple of podcast episodes on this. One is really recent, and it's an interview with a school principal in the Indiana area, and it's called Prioritize Your People. And I think it really boils down to that. And by prioritize, I mean, one of the things that I talked about with this specific principal is that he uses his calendar to schedule time with individual teachers. And he admits, that he's not perfect at it, but he intentionally tries to create at least a little space to be able to check in with teachers one-on-one beyond the typical kind of drop in your classroom, hey, how are you kind of scenario. So I think there has to be some structure and some expectation for leaders around how you're going to show up and what your intention is behind showing up as well.
So when I came into teaching, I felt the same, like I said, I felt the same way as you. And I was also blessed and cursed with having two titanic teachers on either side of me who were just great. They made it look so easy. They were veterans. So they looked like the good teacher that I wanted to be. So I think my way of being that was unhealthy. Their way of being at it was just the fact that their capacity had grown. How do you know, as you grow throughout your career, that I can take on more?
So I think it starts with choosing one thing.
Yeah.
And this is information I wish that I had as a new teacher. So when I first went into the classroom, I was teaching second grade and it was all subjects. And so I picked all subjects. As a new teacher, decide what your one thing is it going to be. Is it going to be ELA? Is it going to be science? Is it going to be social studies? Is it going to be your reading groups? Pick that one thing. And then decide that one day a week or 2 days a week, you are going to have a lights out lesson because I don't know, maybe you're going to do song and dance, or maybe you're going to bring in some cool resource or some cool activity, or you're going to do a classroom transformation, right? That's how you start to build up your toolbox. So that 1 year or that one semester, for example, you chose to be lights out when it comes to science or social studies once or twice a week. So then the next semester, you pick either the same subject and you increase the number of days,
Right.
or you pick a different subject and you decide, you know what, I'm going to pick, ELA for the second semester, and I'm going to be lights out 1 day a week or 2 days a week,
Right.
just kind of depending on what that scheduling looks like. Because what you want to do is build up your teacher toolbox over time.
Mhm.
And I think so many of us immediately go into the classroom space and are automatically like, okay, everything needs to be lights out immediately because you see other people around you doing that. But here's the thing, you don't have any context or framework for how long it took those Titanic teachers to get there.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one more quick question.
Yeah, there's
I've
a
got-
question in the chat.
There's a question in the chat for you. It's Justin from Florida. He's also a colleague of mine. So thank you for presenting and sharing today. What shifts might you make at the district level to address burnout? Have you seen some promising examples, adapting school schedules, calendars, simplifying curriculum, lesson planning? What kinds of things can we do from a systematic standpoint?
That's a great question. So I'll answer the easy part of that first, which is what promising examples have I seen? So the one sort of promising example that I've seen happen in a couple of states or in a couple of districts in the country is that 4-day school week. I think that's beneficial for both students and teachers, especially because that 5th day really allows for teachers to, either get caught up on work or to get caught up on work if, they have work to get caught up on, but also to have that level of separation so that you can truly be refreshed for the weekend. Other than that, I, unfortunately have not seen a lot that districts are doing well. I think a lot of it is often relegated to the teachers themselves in order to to kind of deal with those issues. But when it comes to what shifts might be made at the district level, I think first and foremost, there has to be, so the same way that there are, we have, say like health insurance, for example, and we have these meetings to talk about our insurance benefits. I truly think that teacher wellness should be made a part of teacher benefits packages, and that there should be this intentional plan around, say, for example, and some of these are my dream pie in the sky ideas, things that I've talked about and dreamed about, that it is required that you take X amount of days off each semester. It's required that you take 2 personal days a semester or 1 personal day a semester, or whatever that looks like for a district. I also love the idea of more districts. I know many teachers are, anti this idea, but I'm also really liking the idea of a modified year-round calendar. Instead of an 8-week summer, maybe having a 3 or 4-week summer, but having that week after every quarter. I actually do know a couple of school districts that are already doing that, so that that you're looking forward to having some time for you in between those spaces. And then I also think just having teachers need to be invited into these district spaces to help co-create the planning for this. Because ultimately, decisions are always made for us by folks who have either been away from the classroom setting for a very long time and are not exactly aware of what the current struggles are, or maybe they're aware, but there's a disconnect in the relatability because it's been, however long. And so I think that has to happen as well. So teachers have to be invited into those spaces. And then I think there has to be some willingness to loosen the reins around what our expectations for teachers are and place more autonomy in the hands of the teachers as well, as far as how they can show up. I think one of the ways that you do that, and one of the ways that you show that you care, is say you implement, something at the district level related to creating a wellness plan. Yep. You expect me to show up with the student learning objective and I have to spend hours creating those student learning objectives. Well, what about my teacher wellness objective? Yep. What about educator wellness objectives?